You know that feeling when you're just treading water in the middle of a rushing river?
Oh, yeah. Like you're fighting with absolutely everything you have just to keep your head above the surface.
Exactly. And the harder you fight the current, the more exhausted you get.
Hmm.
And eventually you become like entirely convinced that the river itself has a personal vendetta against you.
Right. Like the
And,
universe is just out to get you
oh
specifically.
yeah. And we spend, honestly, massive portions of our lives doing exactly this. We feel like we're constantly at war with reality.
We really do.
And we're totally convinced that our various coping mechanisms are the only things keeping us safe. But if we actually look closely, those coping mechanisms might actually be the heavy boots pulling us under.
I mean, it is a fundamentally exhausting way to exist. And yet it's this nearly universal human experience.
Mhm.
We dedicate just an astonishing amount of cognitive and emotional energy to building these highly complex, invisible structures in our minds.
Which is wild when you think about it.
It is, because the goal is always to protect ourselves, right? From pain, from uncertainty, or, criticism. But eventually, the maintenance of those defensive structures just becomes our full-time job.
We're just constantly guarding the fortress.
Exactly. We spend all our energy guarding the fortress instead of actually, living in the world outside of it.
Which is exactly why our mission for this deep dive is to cut right through all that noise. We are
Yeah.
going to dismantle the anxiety, the constant overthinking, and that defensive posture that really defines so much of modern life.
Sounds like a big project.
It is, but we have some great tools for it. We're looking for a way to stop pushing the river, right, and actually learn how to let it carry us. So for you listening, to do that, we are drawing heavily on two incredibly pragmatic Zen texts.
I love both of these sources so much.
Same. First, we have Nothing Special, Living Zen by Charlotte Joko Beck. It was edited by Steve Smith.
Hmm.
And what stands out immediately about this book is its complete refusal to indulge in any like romantic, mystical flirt.
Totally. She pulls no punches.
None. It completely strips away that image of sitting on a mountaintop in eternal bliss, and it forces you to look at raw every day and sometimes, highly uncomfortable experiencing.
Yeah, it's arguably one of the most grounding texts in the modern Zen canon. I mean, it forces you to confront the reality of a Tuesday morning commute rather than, an idealized spiritual fantasy.
Right. And to complement Beck's work, we are also looking at A Cup of Zen by K.M. Allen, who writes under the name Kai Tsukimi.
A fantastic collection.
It really is. It's a collection of 21 bite-sized stories, structured intentionally to be read slowly, like
Yeah.
one per day, to quiet what Zen tradition refers to as the monkey mind.
Right, that restless, swinging, branch-to-branch anxiety that just keeps us totally detached from the present moment.
Exactly. And there's one specific story in A Cup of Zen that I think serves as the perfect diagnostic tool for this entire problem. It's this classic Zen metaphor about a scholar who travels to visit a renowned master.
Oh, the tea story, yes.
Yes. So the scholar sits down and immediately starts talking a mile a minute. He's like listing his accomplishments, quoting obscure texts, theorizing, basically just trying to prove his intellectual worth.
Just filling all the air in the room.
Totally. And the master says absolutely nothing. He just picks up a teapot and starts pouring tea into the scholar's cup. He pours until it reaches the brim, and then he just keeps pouring.
I always imagine the scholar's face right at this moment.
Right, because the scalding hot tea is just spilling all over the table. It's pooling on the floor, splashing right onto the scholar's lap. And the scholar finally leaps up and yells for him to stop, pointing out the obvious, like the cup is completely full.
And what does the master say?
The master just sets the teapot down and tells him, "You are just like this cup. You are so full of your own thoughts, your own assumptions, and your own anxieties about the future that nothing new can possibly enter. Until you empty yourself, I cannot teach you anything."
It perfectly illustrates the biological and cognitive bottleneck we create for ourselves. Because when your internal narration is running at maximum capacity, like when you're constantly analyzing what someone thought of you or rehearsing an argument you might have tomorrow, reality literally cannot penetrate your awareness.
You just totally blocked off.
Right. You are reacting to a simulation in your head rather than the actual world in front of you. And Charlotte Joko Beck uses a parallel metaphor that expands on this mechanical problem just beautifully.
Oh, the whirlpool one.
Yes. She asks us to look at a river and observe a whirlpool. When the rushing water hits a submerged rock, it creates a vortex. Water rushes in, it spins around fiercely, and then it rushes out.
Right, it's constant motion.
Exactly. A whirlpool is not a separate object, right? It's just the river itself taking a temporary dynamic shape. And Beck argues that human beings are exactly like those whirlpools. The tragedy of our existence is that we refuse to accept our temporary, fluid nature.
Yeah, we are utterly terrified of being temporary. We want to be a solid, permanent object with a title, a fixed identity, and, guaranteed security. Basically, we try to freeze the water.
Precisely. And because we fear that fluidity, we try to build fixed concrete dams around our individual whirlpool, to protect our separateness from the rest of the river.
Which doesn't work out well.
No, because consider the physics of a river. When you build a rigid dam around a whirlpool, the water can no longer flow in and out. All the debris, the difficult experiences, the offhand comments, the daily stresses, it all gets trapped inside those walls.
It gets completely clogged.
Yes. So instead of remaining a dynamic, rushing vortex that processes life as it comes, we create this stagnant, festering pool of anxiety.
Okay, I hear that, and I understand the appeal of being a dynamic vortex.
Yeah.
But let me push back here.
Sure.
Because in the actual physical world, we absolutely need boundaries to survive.
Yeah.
Like, if you operate with zero borders and just let everyone's demands and toxicity flow freely through you without resistance,
They burn out immediately.
right, you are going to get completely destroyed in a corporate environment or, in a difficult relationship.
Yeah.
We cannot function without dams.
What's fascinating here is that Beck actually addresses this. That is a critical distinction to make, and it's where her philosophy is incredibly nuanced. She draws a hard line between inherent boundaries and artificial boundaries.
Okay, inherent versus artificial. Break that down.
So inherent boundaries are the physical realities of your existence. The fact that you only have 24 hours in a day, or that you require 8 hours of sleep, or that your bank account only holds a specific amount of money.
Right, gravity, time, biology.
Exactly. You absolutely must respect those limits. But the dams that block our flow, the ones she's warning against, are the artificial defensive boundaries. These are the rules we invent out of ego and fear.
Give me an example.
Well, rules like, my colleagues must always respect my ideas, or I must never look foolish in a meeting, or even my partner must always anticipate my needs.
Whoa, wow.
Those aren't boundaries protecting your physical safety. Those are rigid demands protecting an artificial identity. And when reality inevitably breaches those artificial walls, you suffer immensely.
That reframes it completely. I mean, it's the difference between stepping away from a project because you were genuinely out of hours in the week versus abandoning a project because a manager offered a piece of constructive criticism that, bruised your ego.
Exactly. The latter is just defending a stagnant pool.
And Beck has a phenomenal way of describing exactly how we actively defend those artificial boundaries. She introduces the concept of the baseboard.
This is such a great visual.
So for you listening, I want you to imagine that you are walking through life carrying a massive, heavy electrical baseboard, right? And it's covered in millions of outlets. Every single outlet represents one of your subconscious demands about how the world should be.
Just waiting to be plugged in.
Exactly. Now, let's say someone does something trivial but annoying, like someone steals the parking spot you were waiting for. In your mind, you grab a plug and jam it into the specific outlet labeled, "People should be considerate of me."
And the moment you plug it in, your nervous system receives a massive, searing jolt of tension and anger.
It's an instant shock to the system. But the most fascinating psychological trick we play on ourselves here is that we blame the driver in the other car for the electrocution.
Right, we say, look what you did to me.
Yes, we yell, look at the pain they are causing me. But the driver just parked a car. The actual electrical distress, the physiological spike in cortisol and adrenaline, didn't come from their action. It came entirely from our own internal baseboard.
It was generated by our demand clashing with reality.
Yeah. And Beck shares this highly relatable story about herself, actually, where she spent months waging a silent, passive-aggressive war over a premium parking spot at her workplace.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. She was trading nasty memos, fuming during her commute, just utterly consumed by the injustice of it all. Then, sitting at a stoplight one morning, she suddenly realized she was destroying her own mental health over the prospect of walking an extra 40 feet across a paved lot.
Wow. 40 feet.
Right. And the moment she voluntarily dropped the demand for the spot, the moment she unplugged, the entire conflict just evaporated.
See, the baseboard is a brilliant diagnostic visualization for what the philosopher Gurdjieff called our chief feature.
Chief feature.
Yeah. When we're children, we inevitably encounter the chaotic, frightening, and unfair nature of the world, right? And because a child lacks the power to change their environment, they develop a survival strategy to cope with the helplessness.
Like a coping mechanism.
Exactly. Some children figure out that if they perfectly conform and become the good kid, the threat lessens. Others learn that if they attack first and dominate, they won't be bullied. And others learn to completely withdraw and just become invisible.
That makes total sense.
Over decades, that strategy solidifies into our chief feature, our baseboard. Our adult lives become entirely devoted to servicing and validating this strategy. We unconsciously seek out environments that prove our strategy is necessary, and we fiercely battle anyone who challenges it.
But if our entire ego and identity are wrapped up in this baseboard, unplugging from it is going to feel terrifying. I mean, it feels like a small death. So how do we actually decouple from this wiring?
It's not easy. Beck argues that the only way to dismantle it is to willingly enter what she calls the cocoon of pain.
The cocoon of pain sounds inviting.
Right. But the analogy she uses here is profound. If you want a caterpillar to become a butterfly, there is no shortcut. The worm cannot just glue wings to its back.
Right.
It has to spin a dark, restrictive cocoon, seal itself inside, and literally dissolve into genetic mush before it can reform. It is an inherently dark, uncomfortable, and solitary process.
And we live in a society that desperately wants the graceful flight of the butterfly without ever enduring the terrifying dissolution of the cocoon.
Oh, absolutely. When we encounter a situation that triggers our baseboard, say a sharp email from a boss, we feel that physical heat rise in our chest, and our immediate instinct is to flee that discomfort.
Right. We externalize the pain by firing off an angry reply, or we numb it by opening a new tab and scrolling through social media for an hour.
Yes, anything to not feel it. Resting in the cocoon means doing the exact opposite. It means sitting completely still with the raw bodily sensation of that anxiety, without taking any action to fix it, and without spinning a narrative about who is to blame.
It makes me think of a rigged car alarm. You know those aftermarket car alarms that are dialed up so sensitive that like a heavy gust of wind or a leaf falling on the windshield sets them off?
Oh, yeah, so annoying.
The leaf isn't actually a threat to the car. The problem is exclusively the overly sensitive alarm system. When our baseboard gets triggered, the alarm in our brain starts blaring. And to escape the noise, we usually try to analyze the leaf.
We obsess over it.
Yes. We're like, why did that leaf fall on my car? What is that leaf's underlying motivation? How dare that leaf disrespect me? Or we just dissociate entirely.
Right.
Sitting in the cocoon means locking yourself inside the car while the alarm is absolutely deafening, acknowledging how deeply unpleasant the noise is, and just letting it scream until the battery drains and it stops on its own.
And the physiological reality is that the battery does drain. An emotional spike has a biological half-life, provided you don't continually recharge it with angry thoughts.
Right.
But sitting in that car, enduring the alarm, requires us to surrender a very deeply held cultural belief. It requires giving up what Beck calls the promise that is never kept.
Ah, the promise that is never kept. That promise is literally the engine of modern consumerism and modern anxiety.
Yeah, it really is.
We are collectively obsessed with the idea of an ultimate permanent fix. We operate under this delusion that if we just acquire the perfect job title, or find our exact soulmate, or perhaps say the right positive affirmations in the mirror every morning, our car alarm will be disabled forever.
We believe we are owed a permanent state of bliss.
Exactly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, from a Zen perspective, expecting a permanent state of bliss is worshiping a false god. It stands in direct contradiction to the fundamental nature of the universe, which is impermanence and constant change. What we are really searching for is the eye of the hurricane. We imagine that if we just hustle hard enough, arrange our finances perfectly, and curate our social circle, we can build a house right in the center of the storm.
Right, a perfectly safe space.
We think we can sit in this calm, sunny, safe space while the chaos of life rages around us. But meteorologically and psychologically, you cannot homestead in the eye of a hurricane. The storm is relentlessly moving. The walls of the eye will eventually pass over you.
That is such a crucial realization. If we accept that the storm will always reach us, our entire strategy has to change. And Beck illustrates this with the contrast between an airplane pilot and a glider pilot.
Such a powerful image.
So imagine you're piloting a commercial airplane. right into a Category 5 hurricane. You are going to be fighting the yoke with white knuckles. You're sweating, terrified, staring at the instruments, burning fuel, just desperately trying to wrestle the machine back to the safety of the eye.
It is pure agonizing resistance.
Yes. Now imagine a glider pilot caught in the exact same hurricane. A glider has no engine. The pilot knows they cannot overpower the winds, and they know that eventually gravity is going to win and they are going to go down.
Right.
Because they accept the inevitability of the storm and the lack of an engine, what do? They let go of the resistance.
Yeah.
And the moment they do, they get to experience the raw, terrifying, incredibly beautiful majesty of the ride.
It completely shifts the source of the suffering. And it actually reminds me of how Beck radically reinterprets the Greek myth of Sisyphus.
Oh, I love her take on this.
Right. We're all familiar with the story. Sisyphus is condemned by the gods to push a massive, heavy boulder up a steep mountain, only to watch it roll all the way back to the bottom just as he reaches the peak.
For eternity.
For eternity. It is culturally understood as the ultimate metaphor for a hellish, pointless existence. But Beck points out a fascinating psychological truth. Pushing a heavy rock is just physical labor. It isn't inherently hell. Hell is the hope that the boulder will finally stay at the top. So for you listening, I want you to think about the boulder you are pushing right now. Maybe it's a difficult startup you're trying to launch, or a chronic illness you're managing, or a fractured family dynamic you keep trying to fix. Are you suffering because the work itself is unbearable? Or are you suffering because you are clinging to the hope that one day the boulder will stay parked at the summit and you'll finally be allowed to be happy? The hope is the actual instrument of torture.
If Sisyphus can manage to abandon the hope of completion, if he stops living in the imaginary future where the rock stays put, his entire reality changes. He can pull his awareness back into the present moment. He can feel the rough texture of the stone against his hands, the engagement of his muscles, the steady rhythm of his breathing. When he focuses purely on the act of pushing moment by moment, the burden transforms.
It's no longer a punishment.
Exactly. The labor becomes his life, and the pushing itself can even become a source of quiet joy. The agony comes entirely from the mental demand that reality should be different than it currently is. Okay, so the theory is beautiful, but I want to ground this in daily action. How do we drop that hope? Because our brains are completely hardwired to view life as a series of objects to conquer.
We really are.
We operate constantly in a dualistic mindset, subject versus object. I am the subject, and my career, my partner, or even my own sadness is an object that I need to analyze, manipulate, or defeat.
That subject-object dualism is the core mechanical error we make. Now, in older, more traditional, rigid interpretations of Zen practice, there was a heavy emphasis on a state called samadhi.
Samadhi. Oh.
In that older context, practitioners often use samadhi to blank their minds entirely, to enter a trance-like void in order to ignore physical pain or bypass emotional distress. They try to erase the object entirely.
Just checking out, basically.
Pretty much. But true, living Zen, as Beck defines it, has nothing to do with escaping into a blank, unfeeling void. It is about the shift from having experiences to simply experiencing.
It's about collapsing the distance between the subject and the object. Instead of sitting back and judging the act of hammering a nail, you become entirely one with the swing of the hammer.
Exactly.
Or, much harder, when you feel angry, you don't judge the anger or analyze the person who caused it. You just become one with the physical heat and pressure of the anger itself, stripping away the narrative of poor me and they shouldn't have done that.
Exactly. When you strip away the narrative, you enter the territory of what a Cup of Zen calls Prism 3, the world of action and the concept of wu-wei.
Wu-wei.
Yeah. Wu-wei is often translated as effortless action or action without action. Mechanically, it means aligning your personal will with the natural flow of events rather than fighting them.
How does that look in practice?
Well, if your goal is to smooth out a jagged rock, wu-wei dictates that you don't stand there punching the rock with your bare hands, breaking your knuckles in frustration. You allow a stream of water to flow over it.
Right.
The water is perfectly soft, perfectly yielding, and yet, over time, it effortlessly grinds the rock into a smooth stone.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Let me play devil's advocate here. Because effortless action and yielding can sound incredibly passive to a modern ear.
Sure.
If someone is actively taking credit for your work at the office or treating you with disrespect, does wu-wei mean you just float along like a helpless leaf and let them walk all over you? How is that not just being a doormat?
It is a very common misunderstanding, but Wu Wei absolutely does not mean passivity. Effortless action doesn't mean doing nothing. It means taking action without the heavy, toxic interference of your ego.
Okay, distinguish that for me.
Beck uses a wonderful story about the Trevado fighters to clarify this exact difference. She knew two old men who lived next door to each other. They were the best of friends, but they were also intensely, fiercely competitive about who could grow the biggest, best tomatoes in their gardens.
I love this story.
Come fair season, these two men would lean over the fence and absolutely scream at each other. They would get red in the face, gesturing wildly, debating soil acidity and watering schedules.
Just going at it.
Going at it. But the critical detail is that they did it entirely in the spirit of play. There was zero ego residue. They weren't defending an artificial boundary. They would scream themselves hoarse, laugh, and then go sit down to have dinner together.
So, conflict in itself is not a failure of Zen. Friction is fine.
Right. Conflict is an unavoidable, natural part of human interaction. The damage doesn't come from the conflict. It comes from the self-centered, defensive anger that usually fuels it.
Ah.
When you confront a coworker while you are plugged into your baseboard, when your ego feels physically threatened, your words are going to carry a toxic, destructive residue that damages the relationship.
Because you're reacting from that pain.
Exactly. But Beck says we need to learn to speak from the Tao, which she pragmatically describes as waiting until the mud settles and the water is clear.
Let the mud settle.
If you wait out the blaring car alarm in the cocoon, the physiological anger dissipates. Once the water is clear, you can draw an incredibly firm boundary. You can look that coworker in the eye and state clearly and without trembling that their behavior is unacceptable.
But because you're calm, it lands differently.
Yes. Because that statement is coming from grounded observation rather than defensive rage, it lands as an objective truth. It doesn't leave a toxic wake.
Waiting for the mud to settle requires an immense amount of patience and, self-regulation. But when you manage to do it, the way you view your own flaws fundamentally shifts.
It really does.
And this brings us to the beautiful archetype from A Cup of Zen of the Broken Pot and the Japanese art of kintsugi.
Oh, I adore kintsugi.
In kintsugi, when a valuable ceramic bowl shatters, the artisan doesn't throw the shards away. And crucially, they don't try to glue the pieces back together with invisible adhesive to pretend the break never happened. Instead, they repair the seams with a lacquer mixed with powdered gold or silver.
It is a radical philosophical statement. The repair illuminates the fractures. The history of the object, including its destruction, is what gives it profound value.
Applying that psychologically is just transformative. Our cracks, our deep regrets, the catastrophic mistakes we've made in our careers or relationships, these are not shameful liabilities that we must hide behind defensive dams.
No, not at all.
They are the exact experiences that make us whole, empathetic, and uniquely valuable. The gold is in the repair itself. But instead of letting the gold show, we spend our lives walking around terrified that someone will notice we are broken. Which leads to, honestly, my absolute favorite metaphor from Joko Beck, the way of the ice cube.
It's an inherently silly visual, but it captures the absurdity of human behavior so perfectly.
Right. Beck asks us to imagine that human beings are essentially frozen, rigid, 2-foot-tall ice cubes walking around on spindly little legs.
These blocky little guys.
Yeah. Because we secretly know we are fragile and fear-shattering, we clench up and freeze ourselves as hard as we possibly can, and then we march out into the world, defensively smashing into other ice cubes.
Smash, smash.
We operate on the logic that if we make ourselves colder and harder than the people around us, we will survive the collision and they will break.
Yeah.
But being an ice cube is a miserable existence. You are constantly cold, you're perpetually rigid, you're dying of thirst because you cannot drink your own frozen water, and you just leave a trail of bruised and shattered ice cubes in your wake.
And if you find yourself relating to that rigid ice cube, this raises an important question. How do we stop the smashing? How do we de-ice?
And we melt.
Well, Beck notes that you cannot force yourself to melt through sheer willpower. You can't aggressively command yourself to relax. The melting only begins when a rigid ice cube encounters one that has already surrendered and melted into a puddle.
You have to become a puddle.
Yes. And the mechanism that causes the melting is the warmth of observation. It is the warmth of the witness.
Wow, the warmth of the witness.
When you stop projecting your anxiety outward and blaming the world, and instead just quietly observe the tightness in your own chest, that non-judgmental awareness acts as heat. Slowly, your rigid edges begin to lose their definition. You start to get a little mushy.
And the beautiful rule of psychological physics here is that once you get a little mushy, once you truly feel that release, you can never completely unknow it. You can never go back to being a perfectly oblivious, frozen block of ice.
Precisely. You might try to freeze back up when you are frightened, but the structural integrity of the ice is forever compromised. Eventually, you let go, and you become a puddle.
Which is actually a superpower.
It is, because the distinct tactical advantage of being a puddle is that you no longer have to fight the ice cubes. When a terrified, defensive ice cube comes stomping into your office or your living room and steps right into your puddle, they don't shatter you.
You have no rigid edges to break.
Exactly. Instead, the warmth and acceptance of your puddle simply surrounds them. And quietly, inevitably, they begin to soften too. You influence the environment not through forceful resistance, but through formless presence.
That is just a profoundly different way to move through the world. So let's quickly retrace the map of this deep dive for you listening. We started by recognizing the bottleneck, right? Your cup is overflowing with assumptions, preventing you from experiencing reality.
Mm-hmm.
We discussed how to dismantle the rigid dams clogging your whirlpool by unplugging your baseboard, which means bravely sitting in the uncomfortable cocoon of physical anxiety rather than lashing out.
We learned to release the agonizing hope that Sisyphus's boulder will stay at the top of the hill, finding joy instead in the simple act of pushing.
Right.
And by collapsing the distance between subject and object, we move from dualistic combat into wu-wei, effortless action, where we can engage in the messy conflicts of life with clean energy, waiting for the mud to settle before we speak.
And finally, we saw that by embracing our kintsugi cracks, we can stop aggressively defending our fragile egos, allowing the warmth of observation to melt us from rigid ice cubes into yielding, life-giving puddles.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. But as we conclude this deep dive, I want to pose a new question for you to mull over, something that takes this entire philosophy out of the realm of personal peace and into the structural reality of the world we actually live in.
Oh, this is the big question.
Yeah, we exist in a hyper-competitive, fiercely capitalist global economy that literally rewards ice cube behavior. It rewards rigid ambition, the aggressive defense of intellectual property, and the constant, restless pursuit of quarterly growth.
It's an ice cube factory.
Exactly. So ask yourself this: is it actually possible to scale the concept of wu-wei? Can a business, a community, or even an entire society function purely as a puddle? Or is the chaotic, smashing friction of the ice cubes the necessary engine that drives human progress? Take that into the storm with you.